Now that we've stripped both ends of the power cable, thread the end of the power cable through the 3/4 inch end of the PVC conduit so that the newly stripped wire ends are exposed on what will be the inside of our controller. For now, the box can be moved a good foot or two down the length of the power cable to make the wiring easier. Before we get to wiring, however, it's important to note how the box lid should be oriented. For the duration of the manual, I will refer to this as the top side of the lid, and this is the bottom side of the lid. That way, our power switch is in the bottom left-hand corner of the lid. So returning to the stripped ends of our power cable, we will first connect the marked wire to the on and off switch. Looking at the switch, you'll notice that there are two individual screws mounted on either end of the switch. Just like the alligator clips, we're going to use the on-side screw to connect our marked wire to the strip. So looking at the label on the switch, we are going to loosen the screw that's mounted above the word on. Using a Phillips head screwdriver, we'll loosen the screw so that about half of the threads are now exposed on the left while the rest of the threads still hold the screw in place on the right. Taking our striped wire, we're going to place the wire directly over the top of the exposed screw threads and coil the wire clockwise, being sure to make at least one full turn. Using a flat head screwdriver to poke the holes in between the metal lip and the head of the screws, we're going to hold the wire in place using a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten the marked wire in place against the metal lip and test to make sure that the wire is securely in place. After you've properly attached the striped wire to the power switch, we'll use our first orange wire nut to connect the 3 terminal blocks to the unmarked wire of our power cable. It's important to note that wire nuts are color-coded. Orange wire nuts are used to connect 4 wires, and blue wire nuts are used to connect 3 wires. So this connection, using an orange wire nut, will be made in the empty white space in the top left-hand corner of our lid. As such, everyone should make sure that any wires they connect to their terminal blocks will be able to reach this area with a spare inch or two of wire remaining before making the connection to the terminal blocks. If there is more than an inch or two that will be left when you connect the wire to the terminal block, cut the wire's length down so that the length meets the criteria just previously stated. Take a moment and select 3 wires to use for this connection. Be sure to use one of the long wires found in your kit for connection to the right terminal block. Now that you've selected your 3 wires, identify the central left port on each of your terminal blocks. The central ports are located here on each of your switches, and then find the hole beneath the central left screw. This is your central left port. Each of the 3 switches has this port. Starting with your left terminal block, pick one of your shorter wires and expose roughly 1/4 inch of the wire with your strippers. If the wire you've chosen has already been previously stripped, cut down the length of the wire, if required, to a length of roughly 1/4 inch. Now, insert the exposed wire into the central left terminal port, hold the wire firmly in place, and use a flathead screwdriver to thoroughly tighten the wire in place. Test to be sure your connection is secure by pulling on the wire. If your connection comes loose, redo the wire to the terminal port and tighten the screw more before moving on. Repeat this same process of connecting the wire to the terminal port for the central switch located above the rheostat, as well as the switch to the far right. Don't forget that each wire should have 1/4 inch of the wire exposed on one end, while the other end has roughly 1 inch exposed. When connecting the wire to the far right terminal port, be sure to let the wire run between the rheostat and the central switch, and not directly over the rheostat. After you've inserted the 3 wires to each of the central left terminal ports, we will now connect them with the unmarked power cable wire using an orange wire nut. To do this, coil the 4 single wires into 2 wire pairs, being sure to twist to the right. It does not matter which wire combines with which. Once you've made your 2 pairs, twist the pairs together as best you can. Hold all 4 wires together roughly 1 inch below the connection and use one of your 2 orange wire nuts to join the wires in place. Be sure to twist the wire nut clockwise and only stop doing so when the wire nut will no longer twist. Now that we've used our first orange wire nut to connect the power cable to the 3 terminal blocks, we'll finish wiring the power to our lid by connecting the on and off switch to the 3 central right terminal ports in the empty space of the bottom right hand corner of our lid. To do this, we'll need to set up our rheostat wiring. This will entail connecting our central motor switch to one of the rheostat screws. Take a moment to locate the central right terminal port on your central motor switch. Using a single piece of speaker wire that's long enough to reach the bottom of the lid from the central port, strip one end of the wire to expose roughly 1/4 of an inch, while stripping the other side of roughly 1 inch of its lining. Next, insert the 1/4 inch long strip into the central right terminal port, and use a flathead screwdriver to tighten the wire in place. Once the wire is secure, lead the other end around the side of the rheostat, under the wire from the right terminal block to the center rheostat screw. Just like with the alligator clips, we will wrap the inch of exposed wire around the threads of this rheostat screw. Be sure to do this above the metal lip, and not below it. Being sure to get as tight a wrap as possible around the rheostat screw, hold the wire in place, and use a Phillips head screwdriver to twist the head of the screw down against the metal lip, securing the wire against it. Then, spin the rheostat nut up against the bottom of the metal lip, use pliers to hold the nut in place as you tighten the screw with your screwdriver, and finally, tuck the wire behind the other rheostat screw, against the rheostat itself. Next, we're going to take one of our shorter wires and connect it to our other rheostat screw. Unlike the previous wires, however, this wire will have both ends stripped of 1 inch of lining, rather than just one end. Be sure this wire will reach the bottom right hand corner of your lid once it's secured to the rheostat. Now, following the same procedure previously executed, wrap one end of your wire tightly around the threads of the right rheostat screw, hold the wire firmly in place, and use a Phillips head screwdriver to twist the screw into place against the metal lip. Spin the rheostat nut up against the bottom side of the metal lip, use a pair of pliers to hold the nut in its place, and use a screwdriver to tighten the screw. Once the wiring for your rheostat is complete, find 2 more wires that are long enough to reach the bottom right hand corner of your lid for both the left and right motor switches. If there will be an excess length of wire to make the connection in the bottom right hand corner, use a pair of wire cutters to shorten the length of the wire. Now, for both wires, strip one end of roughly 1/4 of an inch of its lining, while stripping the other end of roughly 1 inch of its lining. Next, take the longer of the 2 wires and connect it to the central right terminal port of your left motor switch. Do this by inserting the short end of the wire into the port and using a flathead screwdriver to tighten it in place. Once accomplished, guide this wire down the bottom side of the rheostat and twist it together with the other end of your right rheostat screw wire. Do not let the wire go directly over the rheostat. This wire pair should be able to reach the bottom right hand corner of your lid. Next, take your other wire that you've just stripped and insert its short end into the central right terminal port of your right motor switch. Just like with your left motor switch, use a flathead screwdriver to tighten the wire in place. Finally, find a 3rd wire that can reach the bottom right hand corner of your lid from the on and off switch. Once found, strip both ends of this wire of roughly 1 inch of its lining. Then, using a Phillips head screwdriver, loosen the off-side screw on your on and off switch so that roughly half of the threads are exposed on the right side of the metal lip. Next, take one end of your wire and coil it clockwise around the threads of the screw. Hold the wires in place and tighten the screw with your screwdriver back against the metal lip. Be sure to check that your wire is securely attached to the on and off switch. Once accomplished, twist the other end of your wire that was just attached to the on and off switch and the end of the exposed wire coming from your right terminal port together. Finally, taking your 2 wire pairs, twist them together as best you can, and combine the 4 wires using your orange wire nut. Be sure to hold all 4 wires at the base of their lining and to properly tighten the wire nut in place. Now that we've completed the wiring for the power in our controller, the final step for wiring our controller is to connect our tether to the individual motor switches. To do this, we'll need to complete the direct wiring of our motor switches. Notice how each terminal block has 4 empty ports remaining, 2 on each side. This should be a total of 12 ports that at current remain empty. Taking our last 12 wires, cut each length down to 2.5 inches and expose 1/4 inch of the wire on one end and roughly 3/4 of an inch on the other end. Once your 12 remaining wires look like this, select 2 of your wires to mount to your left motor switch. Take the short end of one wire and insert it into the top left terminal port. Secure the wire in place using a flathead screwdriver. Once done, take your other wire and insert its short end into the bottom right terminal port. Secure the wire in place using a flathead screwdriver. Now, take both exposed ends of these 2 wires and twist them together, being sure to twist to the right. Your top left terminal port should now be bridged with your bottom right terminal port. There should be 2 terminal ports that remain empty on your left motor switch. Select 2 more wires and then connect them to your bottom left and top right terminal ports. Then, bridge the 2 ports together by twisting the 2 exposed ends of these wires together. Repeat this same wiring process for your central motor switch, as well as your right motor switch with your remaining wires. Once your motor switches look like this, take your tether and find the end with 6 separate wire ends. Take these 6 ends and slide them through your PVC conduit, just like we did with our power cable. We'll connect these 6 wires to the 3 motor switches, resulting in 2 wires per motor. First, we'll strip each of the 6 ends to expose between 3/4 and 1 inch of the wire. It does not matter which switch the wires from the tether go to. Taking your first 2 wires, one from the pair should be striped and one should be unmarked. Now, looking at your left motor switch, take your striped wire and slide it between the top left and bottom right terminal port connections. Twist the 3 wires together and use a blue wire nut to secure them. Now, take your unmarked wire and slide it between the bottom left and top right terminal port connection. Twist the 3 wires together and use a blue wire nut to secure them. Make sure that the unmarked wire from your tether connects to the bottom left-hand terminal port, while the striped wire from your tether connects to the top left-hand terminal port. Once you're sure your connections have been correctly made, connect your second wire pair to the central motor switch and your third wire pair to the right motor switch. Be sure your wires are joined the same way on the other 2 switches as they are on your left motor switch. Check each connection once you've used your 6th and final wire nut. Next, slide the box of your controller up to your lid and put the 2 together. Making sure that your on and off switch will be catty-cornered to the PVC conduit on the bottom end of the box. Pull the wires free from the interior of your box as best you can without yanking them from their connections inside the controller. Finally, take your rheostat knob and secure it to the metal peg coming out from the top of your lid. To do this, notice how the metal peg from your rheostat has a flat side to it. When sliding the knob onto the peg, make sure that the screw you use to tighten the knob to the rheostat will tighten into the flat surface of the peg. Use a flathead screwdriver to tighten the knob onto your rheostat and test to be sure the knob will not come loose. This completes the instructions required to build an Aquabot. Now all you need is a PVC frame, a 12-volt battery, and a body of water to test the capabilities of your ROV.